Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you are now all being let into the meeting. Sorry, we've had a few technical difficulties already this morning. I'm not sure whether it's the overnight storms or the storms that are still raging, or whether it's just the bad luck of the way these things tend to happen. But lovely to have so many people. I see we've already got over 200 people joined today's UK Moth Recorders Meeting. So I'm Richard Fox. I'm going to be chairing the meeting today, introducing the various speakers. Hopefully they'll all be able to join us. Slightly disconcertingly, we have two speakers from, well, one from the northeast of Scotland and one from the northeast of England, which are the two areas that have been most severely hit by the storms, the current storm. So we're just hoping that that they've still got power and will be able to join us. Anyway, as I say, welcome. Just a few quick housekeeping things before I hand over to Julie Williams, Butterfly Conservation's Chief Exec, to give a welcome. As you may have heard when you joined the meeting is being recorded today so that we can make it available to people that weren't able to come along and watch today. The chat box, some of you have already found the chat box. The chat box at the bottom of the screen is a place for you just to chat amongst yourselves. Lovely to see where people are watching from this morning. So I see people already putting, so someone from Northumberland and from South Scotland. So that's good. Obviously there is some power. Feel free to say little messages and things to each other in the chat box. If you want to ask a question of any of the speakers, then please use the Q&A, the question and answer box. And if there is time for questions after each of the speakers have done their bit, then I will dig out questions from that Q&A box and put them to the speaker. And hopefully that will work. So I trust you've all got the programme. We've got the welcome from Julie, and then 3 talks, followed by a short comfort break, and then another 2 talks to take us up to just after 12:30 when the meeting will finish. Okay, so one of the technical difficulties we've had this morning is that Julie Williams can see us and speak to us, but she can't hear us. So I'm going to use time-honoured tradition and pass over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning and welcome everybody to the annual Moth Recorders meeting. Many apologies. I'm having technical problems with the sound, so I have no idea what Richard has just said. So if I repeat anything that he has said, many apologies. It's such a shame that we are meeting virtually again, but I am keeping everything crossed that perhaps next year we might be able to see each other in person. Richard has already asked you to put where you all are in the chat function, and it's brilliant that there are so many of you here today. I'm actually sitting in my desk in Dorset, and as Martin Warren just said, it's very gloomy here. Since the last conference, Butterfly Conservation has launched its ambitious new strategy to recover, transform, and inspire everyone to save moths and butterflies. This important strategy will push our moth conservation, our recording and our research effort forwards over the next 5 years. The strategy talks a lot about partnership and collaboration, which we absolutely need to do if we're going to turn around the declining number of moths and butterflies. And so before I came on screen this morning, I was reflecting about our partnership with you, the Recording Network. It is by far one of the most strongest and important partnerships we have. And never has your work been as important. And on behalf of all the staff at BC, I want to pass on our huge thanks to you all. But back to the present. So we've been making some changes to our recording and monitoring team. It's been a huge pleasure to welcome Chloe Smith, Rachel Conway, and Karen Purdy to the team. They are helping to drive forward the implementation of our data review, and in the case of Karen, actually increase our GIS capability. Much of the work's being delivered through our Supporting Science project that we successfully received funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. This exciting new project aims to improve data flow, support county recorders, and improve online collaboration. And there are going to be 3 significant outputs that the project will deliver. We're going to be creating a digital county recorder toolkit of guidance and resources to help with verification and data flow. We're going to be creating a data management portal that will enable more data to be processed in one place, with additional functions to help with verification. And there's going to be a programme of 3 iRecord training courses aimed at county recorders, those interested in joining county recorders to assist with verification, and for beginners. I'd also like to take a moment to say thank you to all of those who were involved in the expert working group of moth and butterfly county recorders from across the UK. And you joined us for our first meeting in October. And I want to briefly mention that it's exciting that our work has started on the European Moth Red List in collaboration with Dutch Butterfly Conservation. Here are some names that you will know well. I'm delighted that Mark Parsons is leading on this work for us, supported by Phil Sterling and Sam Ellis. It's in its really early stages, and it's not actually due to report until July 2023, but we will keep you all updated. Another exciting piece of news to tell you is that throughout February, we'll be running a refreshed Moths Matter campaign on our social media channels. We want to draw attention to how important moths are. As part of the campaign, we'll be highlighting the work of the late Douglas Boyes, whose groundbreaking research into the negative effects of artificial light at night on moths was recently revealed. We'll be providing downloadable packs of moth information, and we're going to be urging people to help as much as they can, whether that's reassessing the types of lights in use at night or helping to create some habitat in their gardens. We hope to raise awareness and create change, and we'll be using a wide-ranging amount of content during the campaign, from blogs, amazing facts about moths, videos explaining how fantastic they are, and some more practical things like guides to moth trapping. And I'd really be pleased if you could spread the word on social media for us when the campaign starts next week. I've just mentioned Douglas Boyes' groundbreaking research, and before I hand back to Richard, I want to pay tribute to Douglas. It's an incredible, sad loss that such an inspiring, engaging, and dynamic naturalist and moth scientist died so young. Douglas touched so many people, and he left a significant scientific legacy, providing the first real-world evidence that light pollution is reducing moth populations. We miss him so much, and his family and his friends are in our thoughts, especially today. I want to say a huge thank you to the amazing Zoe Randall and the recording team for organising this meeting, the speakers for their time, and all of you for joining us this morning. And as I said earlier, I really do look forward to when we can meet again face to face. I'm now going to hand back to Richard and try and sort out why I can't hear anything so that I can sit back and enjoy the rest of the talks. And I hope you all enjoy the morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Don't know if you can see that. There you go. Pretty old school here this morning. but we're getting there. Good. And I'm delighted to see that that one of our early speakers has joined us, obviously not suffering a power cut, so that's good as well. So it's all coming together. It's all coming together. So yeah, thanks very much for those words, Julie. Very bright future ahead, but obviously very sad loss of Douglas in the autumn. But we'll all reflect on that, I'm sure, during the morning. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Zoe now, Dr. Zoe Randall, who has organised this meeting today and is going to give the customary update on the National Moth Recording Scheme and associated activities. Zoe, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Good morning. I'm just setting my timer to 20 minutes because I know that I'm good at rambling on. Let's start again, 20 minutes. Right, okay. So I will now share my screen with you. Here we go. Come on. Oh, no, not that one. Share. Right. Come on. So there we go. Hopefully you can all share my see my screen. Richard, can you?
Yeah, looks good to me.
That's super. Great stuff. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. And like Julie said, it is a shame that we're not all in person, but it can't be helped. It's the way things are currently. So we just have to get on with it, I'm afraid. So I'm going to give you an update on the National Moth Recording Scheme. But before I start, I would like to take you back to 2007 and the start of the Moth Count project, which set the wheels in motion for where we are today with the National Moth Recording Scheme. Some of you may remember Susan Anders, the Moth Count outreach officer, and I want to pay tribute to her work this morning as she sadly passed away earlier this month. Susan was a great advocate for moths. She produced the set of stunning 4 moth leaflets. She worked on the Moth Count website and organised over 95 public moth events that attracted more than 2,000 people to the wonder and beauty and importance of moths. And indeed, some of you here today may have got into moths as a result of Susan's activities. And although Susan's no longer with us, her legacy lives on. So rest in peace, Susan, my dear friend and former colleague. Susan, it's been a very sad few months, really. We've lost several very, important voices for nature: Douglas Boys, Susan Anders, E.O. Wilson, and Simon Leather. So it's, more important than ever that we up our ante to, carry on chanting their messages. Here's a lovely chocolate tip. So back to the main event then. So 15 years on from the start of the Moth Count project and the establishment of the National Moth Recording Scheme, we've collated almost 32 million macro moth records, and more than almost 5 million records have been added to the National Moth Recording Scheme since the Atlas was published in 2019. So the map on the right here shows the data sets that we've received from county recorders so far. This is only macro moth data sets I'm showing here. So you can see we've got a couple of areas where we've still got 2017 to 20 data outstanding and 2018 to 2020 data outstanding. But we do have 79 2020 data sets that we've received so far. So we've still got, we're still desperately trying to update the National Moth Recording Scheme database. So we're really keen for county recorders to get their data to us as soon as possible so we can get back up to date with the National Moth Recording Scheme, because the data is used for so many purposes, and I'll talk more about that later. I've had some really good news recently though, and that is this little red area up here is VC 89, which is East Perthshire. And fortunately, we've had a new county recorder come on board. She's so hot off the press, I haven't updated the county moth recorder list yet. I'm taking this as okay, it looks like it's going to be me as confirmation that the lady's ready to step in, and this will be finalised next week. And we've also, there's some movement down here in the Channel Islands as well, because they're very behind with their data as well, but they've had a whole comedy of errors that you couldn't really script, which has delayed the data submission to us, but that's all under control. So there was a lot of anecdotal evidence that 2020 was a great year for moth recording, or recording in general. And we were unable to quantify it previously due to the time lag on the data, but now we're in a position to add some substance to these claims. And what we can see here is these are the 79 2020 data sets that we've received so far. And a third of these saw a 10% or more increase on the number of records they received in 2020 compared to 2019. And you can see here as well that Scotland saw the largest increase, because up here you've got Berwickshire and Midlothian, Renfrewshire, and the East and West Ross, where they received more than 100% increase on numbers of records in their data sets for 2020 compared to 2019. And in England, the greatest increase was down here in East Suffolk, and in Wales, the greatest increase was here in Carnarvon. So we appreciate that moth recording is going through the roof, and it will be interesting to see if these lockdown mothers continue on into the future. So again, with these 79 data sets alone, what we can see is that a third of these 79 data sets in 2020, they had received the greatest number of records since 2009 and possibly ever. So that's really great. If we look at all 79 data sets combined that we've had for 2020, you can see that overall there's been a 27% increase in the number of records received from 2019 to 2020. And the last time we had such a large increase was back in from 2012 to 2013. So we had just shy of 800,000 records, which went up to about 1 million records. So moth recording is very popular. So, as I said, so this graph here just shows the cumulative growth of the National Moth Recording Scheme database over the years. And as you can see, it's gone up and up for macro moths, and we're just shy of 32 million macro moth records, which is great. There hasn't been a great deal of movement on the micro moths, as you can see here. Les has received some data sets. He's happy to receive more, but he won't be doing anything with them in terms of processing and importing to the National Moth Recording Scheme database until he's got on top of the macro moth records. So please do send your micro records in, but if you want them to be processed, then crack on with the macro moth records, and then Les will get to the micro records. So get your micro records in the queue. So just in case some of you are missing the micro moth content today, here's an absolutely stunning micro moth, and it's actually got a pronounceable name, and Ectodemia albifaciella. I think I did all right there. It's an oak feeder. It's found in England, Wales, and southern Scotland. It's on the wing in June, and you can find its mines in August and September. And I think that is an absolute cracking moth and a really cracking photograph. So there's your micro moth fix. There's been lots of work going on within the team over the last few months, and it's great that we've got extra bums on seats in the team to help us drive things forwards. One major development that we've had is that the National Moth Recording Scheme online data entry system has been migrated to the iRecord Indicia platform. So this will help streamline our data flow. And the great thing about it as well is that if you're an existing iRecord user, if you sign up to NMRS Online using your, you register for NMRS Online using your iRecord email address, then you will be linked up to all of your records in NMRS Online and the whole iRecord system. And you can explore your records, explore all records. There's another great feature on there as well, where you can set up sites, so you don't have to enter site details every time. If you go back to the same place, you can save them and then just click a button and they'll auto fill in there. The other thing as well, data quality from the iRecord system is quite often a bugbear for county recorders, particularly with regard to the stage of the moth or moth that you're recording. So in the stage here is a required field, and when you click on this now, you get all these different options of adult larva, larval case, mine, pupa, egg batch, etc., all not recorded. So this is a much, this is a giant step forward, because before it just said things like sub-adult, which is not very useful. Another issue for county recorders as well is the lack of a determiner in the identified by determiner field. And now we've set this up so it will auto-fill the recorder's name in that, so it won't be an empty field. But should someone else have determined the moth identification for you, then the recorder can change that to whoever was the determiner. So we're hoping that this will people will see that we are making progress, we are improving, helping to get iRecord improved to benefit the recording community and the County Moth Recorder network. And the great thing, like I said, with NMRS Online being shifted to the iRecord platform, is it will help smooth our data flows. It will be much more efficient, and the data can be mobilised much quicker to be used for conservation, science and research. So we're looking to go from this messy data flow to something far more streamlined and simplified like this. And we are getting there. And one other real sort of nugget of gold that we've got is that we're really, really pleased that the County Moth Recorder and County Butterfly Recorders are embracing the iRecord technology. This chart here shows the percentage of records that have been verified within iRecord by county recorders. And you can see there's a year-on-year increase, which is absolutely fantastic. You'll notice that moths is slightly lower here, but that's probably because county moth recorders are only just sort of getting around to verifying their 2021 data, ready to send it to us. So this is great. And like I said, we've also got some county recorders are working in teams, and they've got verification assistants that are doing the iRecord verification for them. So if any of you out there fancy doing a bit of verification in iRecord on behalf of your county recorder, have a chat with your county recorder, see if he or she, if that's something he or she would like to have help with. And again, I'll talk more about the, well, I'm just coming on now actually to the iRecord training that we can offer you to support you in your work as a county recorder or as a verifier who's then supporting the county recorder. So as Julie mentioned earlier, we received funding for our Supporting Science project. The funding came from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport and National Lottery funding distributed by the Heritage Fund as part of their Digital Skills for Heritage initiative. I have to say that bit. So a few of the priorities from the County Moth Recorder questionnaire have fed into the Supporting Science project, as has some of the key findings from our data review. So these priorities have been fed into Supporting Science, and they can be fast tracked because we've got funding to deliver them. So one of the key outputs is iRecord training in partnership with the Field Studies Council. We ran an iRecord training course in November last year. This is attended by over 40 county recorders and their verification assistants. We're running another iRecord training session in May for beginners and from diverse backgrounds. And we're hoping that some of them may go on then to do the other verification in iRecord training course that we're running in August. And again, this is for county recorders and their assistants. We've established an expert working group as part of the Supporting Science project, and they will be helping us feed into a toolkit for county recorders. And this toolkit will be there to support county recorders in their work, and it will include things like MBN record cleaner training, QGIS training, county recorder guidance, and much, much more. There's so many skills, and people have got so many little tools and things that they use in their county recorder work, which many county recorders might not really think much of, but actually other county recorders that don't have those tools would find them really valuable and like gold dust. So it's all about peer-to-peer support as well, and sharing tools and ideas. The other big thing that we're working on as well is to develop a data management portal. And this will be available for county recorders to use should they choose to, and it will help future-proof data storage and data management. And again, the expert working group, we will be feeding into this to help us enhance and improve the existing iRecord functionality, because it's likely that we'll be going with iRecord for the data management portal, although it's not quite finalised yet, but it's quite likely. My colleague Rachel Conway and Chloe and several other members of the team have been really busy lately as well in the Supporting Science project with regard to the Garden Butterfly Survey Revamp. So this is being revamped as part of the Supporting Science, and again it will be based on the iRecord Indicia platform, so data flows will be simplified. And there'll be a promotional launch in spring 2022 for the Garden Butterfly Survey. And it's the sort of next progressive natural step for big butterfly count participants to, to take the next step and get into recording, so they can do it in their gardens. And at some point further down the line, it's likely that we'll be adding day flying moths to the Garden Butterfly Survey as well. So Supporting Science is ongoing, and we're working to improve the data flow, keep county recorders happy, and mobilise the data to work for us to tackle the biodiversity crisis. And your valuable data is doing so much more after it's left your computer. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the data use. So all your records and what and that they are really working hard for us, which is why it's important that we keep the data flowing and keep up to date with everything. So NRS data has recently fed into the quinquennial review. So Schedules 5 and 8 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act are reviewed every 5 years by the country agencies working with JNCC. And National Moth Recording Scheme distribution data have been used to inform this 7th QQR. So 7 species have been recommended to maintain their listing in Schedule 5, which that's these. 1 has been removed because it is regionally extinct. There's a further 27 species meet the IUCN Red List criteria for protection, but we're not recommending them to be added to the schedule. A, because in the case of these 21 species, there's no evidence of threat. And for these 6 species here, there's no evidence of threat and they're widespread. And the additional thing to mention as well, that if we were to list these species, on the in the QQR, then it risks criminalising the recording of moths in gardens with no conservation gain. So we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot. So we're going to not list those. The other thing that the data has been used for as well is the traits database. So Patrick Cook and colleagues have pulled together lots of information from various sources to create this Lepidopter traits database. It includes information about life cycle ecology and phenology, conservation status, and it's got breeding habitat, host plant specificity, and all sorts of things. And it's free to download from the UK CEH EIDC, so the Environmental Information Data Centre. And there's a paper, scientific paper, currently being written to go alongside the traits database. So I hope you'll find that that's a really, really great resource for you all to use. Another thing that NRS data has been used for, and Butterflies for the New Millennium data, has been part of the Oak Processionary Moth Toolkit. So, and this was produced by the Tree Council recently. And this provides a common framework for delivering a local risk-based approach to managing oak processionary moth. So after sort of initial assessments of how many moths people have got and how much of a worry or concern human health is on their sites, they can do a little quick preliminary sort of risk assessment. And if it's shown that chemical control is a potential option to control oak processionary moth, then the land manager can consult the moth and butterflies risk map, which shows, where the high risk areas are for chemical spraying. So this just shows the sort of area where oak processionary moth is currently found in the UK. So this is, and then you can zoom in, land managers can zoom in at one case where, click on, and like you can see here for this 1 kilometre square, It gives you a summary of the risk level, and it says it's the highest risk species present, a priority species which only feeds on ochres present at the correct time of the year and could be exposed to spraying. So then the land manager can make an informed decision as to whether it's worth spraying or not. So as you can see, your data do not sit idle, and later on today you'll hear the latest research using National Moth Recording Scheme data on range shifts of cold adapted moths from our very own Elizabeth. So your records inform everything that we do, and it's so important. It's more important now than ever with the current biodiversity crisis that we stay on top. And like I said, if anyone's struggling out there with getting their county data sets to us, then it's my alarm, county data sets to us, then please do let us know. We can try and find you some support and help through the Supporting Science project for that. So all your data feeds into things like site-based management for single species, landscape scale conservation, such as the work that's gone on in the Brex, advice to landowners, advice to local authorities and developers. The data is used for scientific research and also for producing occupancy trends, and also informs things like the red list. And again, all your data are used in our publications and state of reports, our engagement work and outreach. So it's really, really vital. So, and again, like I said, we appreciate that the workload for county recorders is growing, but we're here to help and support. So please let us know, and we can do so much as a collective to support and protect butterflies and moths. So thank you to the county recorders and the recording community and everybody else listed here, and also thank you for listening. And I think in true Randall style, I probably don't have time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Zoe. No, you're right there, I'm afraid. There were a couple of questions came into the Q&A box during your talk, but Les has kindly dealt with those.
Oh, thanks, Les.
Put answers in. So I'm going to move us straight along to try and keep more or less on time this morning. And I'm delighted to welcome Professor Darren Evans. Darren is Professor of Ecology and Conservation at Newcastle University and has been involved for quite a long time now in studying the impacts of artificial light at night on moths, amongst many other things, and has very, very kindly agreed to talk to us today on his birthday. So many happy returns, Darren, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to come and present today. I've attended some of these moth recorder meetings in the past, and I've always been amazed at how much enthusiasm, expertise there is, and it's particularly delightful to see so many more people taking an interest in moths now as well, and long may that continue. So I am actually very pleased to be here for another reason, in that this morning I tweeted that I hope I didn't have a power cut at home. And then I sat down for breakfast, and 10 minutes later we had a power cut in my village in Northumberland. So I jumped in the car and I raced into Newcastle to my office, and I couldn't get in through the door because the wind was so strong, the automatic doors couldn't open either. So it's one of those moments where I'm feeling slightly flustered, but I'm hoping that I can present this talk without any problems. This isn't the machine that I was going to use, and there's lots of automatic updates going on. So if you see various icons coming up, please bear with me in the meantime. So yes, it is a delight to be able to present some work really that Doug Boyes had led on. But what I'm going to do is just talk about how that fits into the wider context of work that we've been involved with butterfly conservation and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And I was just looking at some of my files earlier today, Richard, and we've been working together for 10 years now. So doesn't time fly? I will just try and share my screen. Okay, so I'm hoping that's
great.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to be presenting some results on the impacts of street lighting on local moth populations, and this was from a recent paper which got quite a lot of media attention, led by Doug Boy. So I'm going to be presenting these results really on his behalf, and at the end of my talk I'd like to pay tribute to Doug. It's work that myself, Michael Pocock at UKCEH, Richard and Mark Parsons have been involved with. And hopefully I can move on. So my starting point really is just the context of trying to better understand why so many of the UK's moths are in decline. And of course, it's the state of Britain's moth reports, where data fed in by recorders has really helped us to gain an understanding of the long-term trends in British moths. And we can see from data collected and processed by you guys that we've had a long-term decline in the abundance of British moths. And you can see here on the graph, basically, we've lost a third of the abundance of UK moths since the 1970s. But there are also some regional differences too, where the declines seem to be greater in the south of the country, for example, compared to the north. And I know that previous talks at these meetings have looked at some of those reasons in a little bit more detail. But the point is, what we're trying to understand is the reasons behind this, because we can't really begin to mitigate these problems until we understand what the drivers of these declines are. And trend data is useful for telling us indicatively how biodiversity is getting on in our countryside, but it's quite limited in terms of telling us what is driving these declines in some way or another. And we have got some good evidence that it's habitat loss, the conversion of habitats to housing, for example, or urbanization, or indeed the intensification of our agricultural land, which is behind a lot of the decline that we're seeing, not just for moths, but a whole range of other species too. And of course, climate change is also having an impact, with more research coming through now, helping us to understand this particular driver. Here's a study that I've pulled out looking at the decline of garden tigers, for example, declining by 92% since the middle of the last century. And of course, it's not just a single driver of change that's responsible for these declines. It's likely to be a combination. So, for example, we know that agricultural intensification is detrimental, but we still need to know more about the impacts of nitrogen enrichment, or indeed the overall impacts of pesticides. And of course, there's lots of interest at the moment to do with the regulation and deregulation of a range of commercially available insecticides in our countryside. I've already mentioned climate change, but in a recent review that Richard led, looking at the declines of moths in Great Britain, and indeed some of the possible causes, light pollution was also mentioned. And we talk about light pollution in the context of artificial light at night. So we talk about Alan quite a lot, and obviously on Twitter, every now and again, people would sort of joke, we need to find out who Alan is. Who's Alan? Who's causing all these declines? So hopefully I'll be able to explore and expand on that a little bit more in my talk. But the first thing I wanted to do was just to put some of the research that we were doing recently in the wider context of the work that Richard, Michael Pocock and I have been doing for the past decade. And many of you will know Callum McGregor. He's presented at this meeting in previous years. and has been involved in a lot of subsequent moth research since graduating with his doctorate. But this paper that he published was really the game changer for us in terms of beginning to understand a number of things about moths and why they're important. And one of them, of course, is that through sampling moths in Oxfordshire, of all the moths we caught, we found that a quarter of those were carrying pollen. And this sort of built on a range of studies that we've also been involved with. For example, some work in Portugal, where we found that 75% of moths caught were carrying pollen, which really began to sort of demonstrate the importance of moths as pollinators, but often overlooked pollinators. And most of the studies on insect pollinators to date tend to be on diurnal animals. And we've been trying really hard, actually, to try to include the nocturnal animals, because, of course, these pollination processes carry on long after the ecologists have left the field. But the important thing about this work as well was how we could show how light pollution impacted on the behavior of moths, but also on their ability to transport pollen. So not only could we demonstrate that street lighting was having detrimental effects on moths, but we also argued that it could have profound implications on the ecological processes that they provide, such as pollination. So in this study, we used a combination of sampling methods at what we call matched paired sites. So we found sites which were lit, and we sampled in areas of the same sites that were unlit. And through doing that, we found that moth abundance at the ground level was halved at lit sites, and that species richness was over 25% lower. And flight activity at the level of the light was 70% greater. So what's happening in these lit areas for adult moths, at least, is that they seem to be drawn away from the vegetation at the bottom, which obviously has implications for pollination, with much more of them being drawn to the light. And in that, we found that about a quarter of the moths carried the pollen of at least 28 plant species, and that we found overall there was a reduction in this process of pollen being transported by moths in the process. So that was interesting for us in terms of seeing that there was an impact of street lighting on adult moths. But what it still didn't help us to understand is whether the light pollution itself was impacting on the populations of these animals. So we then managed to attract Doug Boyes to our research team, where he started his PhD with us. And the first thing he did was conduct a review to see whether there was any evidence of the impacts of artificial light on moths across their entire life cycle. And whereas much of our focus tends to be on adults, and of course, there's very valid reasons for doing that, we wanted to see actually whether there was any evidence of impacts across the life cycle, because if there was, then that provided a good system and a good mechanism for us to begin to understand what those overall impacts were at the population level. And through the review that Doug conducted, it's an amazing piece of work. He found very strong evidence of street lighting affecting pheromone production, for example, at the adult stage. But there was also evidence for altered development at the larval stage with activity suppression, as well as strong evidence for increased bat predation too. But we also, through that review, were able to identify evidence for a range of other potential mechanisms. For example, there was some evidence that lighting impacted on the short distance dispersal of moths. Sperm release was disrupted. There was oviposition suppression, and potentially increased parasitism in lit areas, as well as some evidence for direct mortality. We were also able to speculate as to what some of the other mechanisms might be that are impacting on moths, again, across the life cycle. For example, their feeding may be suppressed, or we may see increased predation in areas that are lit compared to areas that aren't. So through this, we could find that there was strong evidence of lighting impacting upon a range of moth species through this comprehensive literature review. And it sort of spurred us on, actually, to try to design some experiments around moths, but at different stages of the life cycle. And the beauty of looking at caterpillars, for example, is that they exist in a discrete patch where they develop and grow, which can be sampled in a controlled experimental setup, which again, hopefully I can demonstrate how successful that sort of approach is in the work that I'm going to produce next. But before I do that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context around street lighting. So when Richard, Michael Pocock and I put our heads together 10 years ago, we knew that the UK was going through a transition of changing its street lamps, and in particular moving away from these orange high pressure sodium lights that you can see on the left towards LED lighting. And we knew that around about 2 million street lamps were going to be replaced in that process, and we really wanted to begin to sort of focus our work around the impacts of those transitions. And certainly where I live in a rural village in Northumberland, we've very recently gone to this transition where we have these LED lights, and it's wound up a lot of people actually, because they're really bright and really intense. And again, people have very mixed feelings about street lighting, which I'll come to at the end. And the important thing here is if we start looking at the wavelength of light, on the bottom right here, you can see the wavelength in daylight, where we move from sort of very blue on the left all the way through to very red on the right. And if you look at the wavelength of low pressure sodium bulbs, for example, on the top left, you can see this sort of orange spike of light. And the high pressure sodium wavelength below seems to sort of mirror a little bit better the distribution of light, as you can see, compared to daylight. But again, sort of very orange red light. However, if you look at light emitting diodes on the top right, you can see a very different distribution of wavelength, but in particular, there's this very blue spike. And we think that this blue spike is significant. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So what we did was we set up a replicated experiment to see whether streetlights affect caterpillar abundance and development in the environment. So Doug did a huge amount of work in selecting sites, controlling for a whole range of environmental variables across the southeast. And what we did is, once we've identified a site, each pair, we had two sections, one that was lit and one that was unlit. But otherwise, the habitats were identical. And within those, we did a range of sampling. And we were in particular focusing on caterpillars that were occurring within some of the hedgerow habitats, as well as the grass margins as well. And the ways in which we would work was Doug would go in, he developed this lovely gutter manipulation of sticking bits of manipulated gutter into hedgerows and beating and collecting the caterpillars that occurred there. And one of the delights of working with Doug is that he was always doing back of the envelope calculations. And so for this 100-meter stretch of hedgerow in the image, this is an unlit hedgerow. He estimated there was around about 21,000 moth caterpillars in amongst that. And then similarly, we've got the grassy strips. And again, we sampled those with sweep netting. And you can see the types of organisms that Doug was collecting within those. And so here I'm going to move on to some of the results. And before I sort of get into the nitty gritty of it, the important thing is we're presenting some data here based on the caterpillars found in hedgerows, which is the data towards the left, separated by that dashed line. I hope you can see it. With caterpillar data collected from grass margins, which are presented on the right. The blue colours represent the data collected in lit areas containing LED lamps. The orange represents the high pressure sodium lamp data. And you can see we've got a couple of low pressure sodium lamps in there as well. And we've just put those in for overall interest. And what this data shows is the ratio of the abundance of caterpillars between lit and unlit habitat. And one of the things that you can see is that essentially all of the ratios are skewed towards there being less caterpillars overall in the lit areas compared to the unlit areas. And this was really striking because this was a consistent pattern across all of the sites we sampled. In fact, these are some of the most striking data that I've seen in the 15 years that I've been an academic. And again, what we've got here is the caterpillar mass. Again, the data on the left is from hedgerows and the data from the right is from grass margins. And although there is some variation in the data, we can see that there are significant effects of lighting on caterpillar mass. And in lit areas, interestingly, we find that generally caterpillar mass was higher than in the unlit areas. And that sort of got us thinking, so, okay, so we have fewer caterpillars in the lit areas, but they tend to have higher mass. Why is that? What could be some of the explanations for that? So to test that, we set up a short experiment using these artificial lampposts. Now, these are set at the heights of standard lampposts that you would find within urban areas. And we set these up in areas where there was no impacts of light pollution at all. So we call it a light naive habitat. And what we did is we put them up for several nights, and we sampled the vegetation underneath to see whether there was any impact on the feeding behavior of the caterpillars within those areas. And again, what we found is that this figure shows the number of caterpillars per transect in lit and unlit areas, again broken up between the high pressure sodium and the LED, and the unlit habitats too. And again, generally what happens when you put these lights up, caterpillar abundance declines. They tend to move away or out of an area very quickly, which again has some sort of indication to us at least that feeding behavior can be impacted by the caterpillars. So in conclusion, we found that artificial light at night disrupts key insect behaviors across the life cycle. And through Doug's work, we found the first direct evidence of the impacts of light pollution on local insect populations. And we believe this is likely to have ramifications for a whole range of other wildlife and ecosystem services and processes associated with animals interacting with these moths. Quite what the overall impact of light pollution relative to some of the other drivers of change, such as agricultural intensification, still remain unclear. And of course, it's a challenge trying to disentangle the relative contribution of a range of factors affecting moth declines. But we're hoping that we can do some experiments at least to begin to unravel those. And the major point really is that it's increasingly prevalent that these white LEDs have far greater impacts on caterpillars and local moth populations than the traditional orange sodium lighting. And obviously that's concerning given that there are these changes. But one of the things that Doug would always say is that we can be optimistic that there are actually some easy solutions. So when this work was published, for example, we've since found that Norfolk County Council and Devon County Council are changing their lighting strategies by either dimming lights or switching them off altogether. And we think there's a lot of work that we can do, particularly with engineers, around filtering out some of that blue light, for example, which we think is particularly detrimental to caterpillars, towards some more warmer lighting solutions, or simply having situations where lights are switched off altogether, or they only come on when there's motion detected. But of course, we have to balance all of these needs with public concern around safety too. But the key is here, I think there is something that we can do here, and something that will make quite a significant difference to not just moths, but a whole range of biodiversity in the countryside. And so we're hoping that we can move on with that in the coming years. Of course, all of this work is a monumental effort, actually, and it could only have been done by somebody as talented as Doug. Of course, it's just a real loss and sadness for us that Doug died during his PhD studies. Thank you to Julie and Zoe, who have already paid tribute. Butterfly Conservation have written a tribute to Doug, which you can see if you follow the web link there. And again, if you would like to make a donation to further Doug's legacy, then there's an opportunity for you to do that there. But otherwise, I hope that you found the talk interesting, and if there's time for any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much.
I pressed the unmute button, but it didn't work. Sorry, I'm here now. Thank you very much. That was great. There are some questions. We probably do have a minute or two. So let me just have a quick look. There are quite a few questions come in right at the end then. So going backwards, Jenny Wilding, are the caterpillars heavier in the LED lit areas because they think it's daylight and continue feeding during the night?
It's a good question. I can't answer that conclusively. I think we would have to set up a different experiment to do that. We think that light pollution impacts moths and puts them under stress. So they put more of their resources into developing quicker. So you can imagine in a situation where moths are feeling threatened in some way or at a disadvantage, they put their resources into developing fast so that they can move out of that area. So that's one of our considerations at the moment, and it's one of the reasons why we looked to see whether there was any evidence on feeding. So I'm not sure. We're only just beginning to unravel some of those mechanisms, and hopefully in the coming years we might have a better understanding.
That's great, thank you. So there are a couple of questions about blue light. You mentioned you showed that blue spike on the LED spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So could you say a little bit more about why blue light is a problem? And someone else has said, could manufacturers of LEDs be persuaded to remove the blue spike?
So the first question, I'm not sure what the physiological responses are to blue light. What we do know through Doug's review is that he reviewed the literature as broadly as he possibly can. And in fact, he went into a number of horticultural studies, the sort of studies that we wouldn't necessarily pick up within ecological journals. And in that, he found that in some commercially important crop species, for example, blue light is used as a way of controlling some pest moth caterpillars. So we know within horticulture that that particular wavelength does have an impact on moths. I'm not sure about the physiology myself, we would have to work with some horticulturalists, I think, to perhaps crack that nut. And then the second question is, again, we were overwhelmed with the response to Doug's paper, actually. Many of you would have seen the paper presented in the media. That prompted lots of people to get in touch with Doug, and also us, saying that, you know, they're lamp engineers, they feel that they can very easily filter those lamps and modify them in some way. So we've been overwhelmed by the response of industry, actually, and people who are concerned about this and who feel that there might be some quick solutions to cutting that blue light out. Now, you know, we need to do more work. I mentioned the councils, for example, changing their light strategy. I can't tell them conclusively whether, if they switch their street lamps off at midnight, that's going to have less of an impact on moth populations or not. I think we've just found a really striking result. We've identified a range of mechanisms around that. The key for us now is to work with industry and local authorities to find ways of actually minimizing those impacts, not just on moths, but on other animals associated with lit and unlit areas.
That's brilliant. Right. Thanks very much, Darren. That's great. We're going to move on. But thanks very much for a really interesting talk. Much appreciated. There are lots of nice comments in the chat about it, and there were more questions as well. But we haven't got time for everything, I'm afraid. But thanks very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, and I'm going to move us straight along to Peter Hall, who's been waiting very patiently. Thanks, Peter. You seem to have a much more stable connection. You've been with us since the start of the meeting. I'm very pleased to know. Peter is the County Moth Recorder for Herefordshire, and he's going to talk about the online Moth Atlas for the West Midlands. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Richard, and well recovered. That was actually very interesting. Yes, up here in the northeast of Scotland, it is blowing an absolute hoolie, so I'm not surprised power's been lost here and there. So far, so good. Yes, I'm the County Moth Recorder of Herefordshire. Some of you may also know me from the Moth Dissection website, for those that dabble in the dark arts of dissection. Where I'm the principal administrator and I think also one of the largest contributors of images. But I'm going to talk to you today about a concept which is the West Midlands Moth Atlas. Just a little bit about the history of it and how it's set up before we go on to looking at the website and going through it. A little while ago, Peter Seal, who was the then chairman of Butterfly Conservation West Midlands, approached me and said that he wanted to do something for moths. And we came up with this idea of an atlas, much the same time as the Moths of the West Midlands book was being mooted as well. And so we had meetings with the county moth recorders of 4 counties with a guy from Staffordshire called Craig Slawson, who had developed the Staffordshire website with Dave Emley. And the progress was slow. We discussed what we wanted, how we wanted it, and he agreed to do it. And ironically, the very week it was due to go live on the West Midlands Butterfly Conservation Moth website, he sadly died and went to heaven and took all his software development with him. So we had to start again. With my knowledge of Jim Wheeler, Moth Dissection, we approached Jim, who readily agreed to take the reins and take over the mantle. And he said he would base it on the Norfolk Moths website. So those of you that are familiar with Norfolk Moths will see some similarities and a lot of differences. Just a little note, if anyone's interested after watching the website, the costs of developing it and setting up are not prohibitive. I'm forever grateful for West Midlands Butterfly Conservation for funding it. The ongoing costs are paid for by what he calls his Golden Cinnabar membership, which allows greater access. And it's very, very easy to and simple to maintain. The data refresh, where does the data come from? Well, the county moth recorders send their records into Les every year, and he sends them back through the records cleaner, and we then send them back and so on. And then it gets imported into the National Moth Recording Scheme. And from here, the data is then repatriated back to Jim, who uploads it onto the database for the atlas. So all the records that are used on the atlas are verified records coming via the county moth recorders. I know there's some interest in, there's another 3 counties in advanced stages of development of a similar website. And I think there's another county also that's pursuing it. There's varying reasons for me why we went and undertook this project. I remember the days before I was county moth recorder when I used to submit my records to the county moth recorder in question. And I felt they were submitted and then they disappeared down a black hole and I never saw them again. So I was very keen to get the local recording people feeling more involved in what they were doing. So this option of an atlas allows them to see their little dots on the map that they've supplied and produced, see all the dots around them that other people have supplied and produced, and see the greater picture. We also allow them to upload photographs onto the website, so that also makes them feel more participatory in the scheme of things. So without much further ado, I'll try and share screen and see if we can get on to watching the atlas. So when you log on to westmidlandsmoths.co.uk, you come up with this basic screen. And this picture here, in this case, I'd hawk moth, is just a random picture. So every time you log on or move, you get a new picture up. Down below, a rolling screen of going from right to left, and these are latest images that are uploaded. And if people want to upload, anyone nationally can upload photographs if they want to. It's a very simple process. Macros, micros, you have a drop-down box for the species, you put your name in. If you want to put comments in, you can, and your email address, which we keep private. Select your file, agree, upload, and it's as simple as that. Background into the administration section of the website, where one of us will look at it, verify it that it's correct and the photograph is of sufficient quality, and then it appears. Then we need your records. That takes you through to county moth recorders. This whole site is hyperlinked to pieces. So this goes to West Midlands, main website. I need to go back now. I don't mind, let me go back. Let's go back. MapMate. This is the headquarters, moth dissection that I'm very familiar with. All these are linked. If you've got a phone and want to use the mobile phone for this website, you've got the mobile facility there. And then some stats on the right here. These are the records that populate the maps, which we'll see in a moment. We've got 1.8 million records currently populating the maps, and we have just over 6,000 photographs. And in the central section, again, that's linked. We've got a notice board. Yeah. Oh, look, there's a National Moth Recorders Zoom meeting today. I'll go and have a look at that after this. Interesting. And then we've got some statistics. So for 2019, 2020, you can see the number of records supplied, number of species, number of recorders, showing slight increases all round. And you have to be a Golden Cinnabar member to see that. And the Golden Cinnabar membership allows you to see more data, more stats, and more information on the interactive maps that we'll look at in a moment. So if I log in, it lets me log in. And we go back to home. If I now show the decade, we get the last, if my maths is correct, 11 years of data. So for example, we can see that in 2010, we have 73,000 records compared to 2020, when the last data was in, we have 122,000. So we can do a comparison of trends across the time. The data is repatriated annually, and we had a very exciting moment in October last year when 2020 data was added, and we anticipate a similar period this year when we'll add 2021 data. So in effect, the website is only about a year out of date. Now, I'm going to go across all these little drop-down bars and give you an idea of what the website can do. We've got the companion book being advertised there, and there's a link there to if you want to buy it. It's a very interesting read. And then we start off with macros. So if we click on there, and this is the first one in the Agratarian numbering system for macros. So we've got Orange Swift. We have 8 photos currently uploaded. And then down below, we have similar species that you can confuse it with. In the central area, we've got some details about the moth itself, how many 10K squares it's been recorded in the 4 counties, earliest record, latest record, number of records, earliest date, latest date, some details about the moths itself. And then we have the new red list. And if you click on there, it comes up with that. That comes up with the same. And then the verification grade. So anyone that's looking, thinks they've got an orange swift, they can see it's verification grade 1, and they can look up what that means. I can't close that down because I'm in the way there. Let's move that out of the way. That's it. And so forth. And then down here, being a Golden Cinnabon member, I can actually see the latest 100 records for orange swift in the 4 counties. This website is not designed as a means for data dumping of information for people. You still need to contact your county moth recorder for that. And this also means that we're not allowing planners and so on to bypass environmental record centres, which is never the idea. So within here, we've got, these are blue, so they're hyperlinked. So Rob Hemming, who I think is listening today. Hi, Rob. If we click on there, for example, it comes up with a little map of, I mean, Rob lives around here somewhere, so it shows you exactly where the record's from, but not precise enough to provide any data protection infringes. We go across to the right now. This is the map of the 4 counties. These in darker shades are vague grid references, so they come out dark. And you'll see that we've got 2 color codes here, white and yellow. White are 2000 onwards and yellow pre-2000. So you get an idea of recent records and older records. And you can also click into the website, the county itself. I was from Herefordshire and I'm the Herefordshire recorder, so we'll go in there. And now you can see down here, we've got 4 color codes, 2019, 2020. 2000 to 2018, 1970 to 99, and pre-1970. And you've got here just the last 100 records, but if you click on, this is where I used to live, it comes up, and these are all my records on Swift. And again, if you click on any of these, it will come up with Brinkstone Common where I used to live. I'll just go on to the next species, and you can scroll through. I mean, I've got a very slow internet connection, but you can see how quickly it's loading up. And each one shows a different map. And then down here, we've got phenology graph. So immature stages, there's 1 immature stage for ghost, and then the adult records. Down below, we have the annual records trend, and you can get older ones up, like here. Move that again. So I can close that down. And if you want to know what all these things mean, there's a key. So down the bottom, it's got what all the lines mean. I need to move that again. And move up. Let's click that down. Right. And then you can show older, as I said. So that's the basic screen. And if we go into some more interesting trends, you've got a search box in here. So if you do Scarlet Tiger, one of everyone's favourites, it shows some very interesting information where you've got nearly all your records here are white records, so they're post 2000, very few yellow, and it's colonised Worcester, the eastern half of Herefordshire, and the very southern tip of Staffordshire, and then the rest of it seems to be following the river valleys as it spreads out. So the trend here, it seems to follow river valleys and then spreads outwards from there to colonise properly. And you've got the trend, map trends there. You've got larval records, pre and late season, and so on. But one of the interesting things here is that you can see the annual records graph is steadily going upwards. If we look at another one, excuse me, everyone's favourite moth. This arrived in Herefordshire, I think, in 2017. So you've got very widely dispersed records generally. A very old historical record up there. But if you look at the records graph, it's going up like a steep side of a cliff. And it is narrowing up, gently leveling off slightly in 2021, but it's still going up very steeply. Micros, it's a very similar picture with micros. So we've got Tumbergella. You've got a little symbol here now which tells you day flying. I think the next one along is nationally notable bee, so it tells you what it is. And you go through like that. Then if we go across here, we've got Finder. This is quite an interesting and useful tool. It's still being developed. Remember, this website's pretty new. So if I select Plume Moths, for example, all the species of plume moths that have been found in the 4 counties. We're still missing some photos. Looking forward to getting some of those in. But it means that for people wanting identification, it might help if they can zoom in and zoom out and see what they've got. Down here, you've got a whole list of families. I'll choose Pyralidae, for example. It will list all the Pyralidae in the 4 counties that have been seen. It's a very nice little tool. That submit, they're all just into the links that you see on the other parts of the website. Facebook group, West Midlands Butterfly Conservation Facebook. Arrivals. This is another very interesting addition. This is the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology development that I was a guinea pig to very early on in its development. So you can look up what's flying tonight. And if we give it a moment, it should populate. At the moment, and this is listing all the moths plus or minus 4 days from today that have been recorded. So Georgia code is Autumnella. We have 87 records plus or minus 4 days from the 29th of January. And they're all there. So if I go back into macros, flying tonight, it will then list all the macros plus or minus 4 days from today and the number of records for the 4 counties. I think it's a nice little useful tool for people. And you've got crawling tonight, notable records, and so on and so on. Info, this is also quite a nice little one. Species list, this takes a little while to download on my slow computer. But this basically what MapMate does is that you can list all the species in the 4 counties, how many records, what the grade is, and you can select and filter down Herefordshire only, post 1980 records, and so on and so on, and filter and produce lists of species in your area. We've also got, and this will take probably a little second to log out because it's still trying to download the data there, so be patient with me for a moment. There we go. And these are links, all the links that we can think of to useful sites that will help. So I guess Andy Banthorpe's listening today. So there's the Herefordshire Moth group, for example. We can log on to that. Herefordshire Worcester Moth blog, which is one of the things I run. There's an advert about the eMoth November newsletter. So everything's in there. So you've got blogs, equipment supplies, bookshops, even maps of weather, branch sites, and so on and so on. Everything you need to know. And the nice thing here for me, for old fuddy-duddies that don't like micromoth common names, you can hide them. You can disable the scrolling text images because we know some people have issues with moving images with their eyes, and the mobile site. So if I go back to here, finish off there. I think that's about it. That's nice and concise. That's how the website works. I say if you're interested in more details about how much it costs to set up, the ease of setting it up, and want to do something similar, contact me afterwards and I'll fill you in on more details. Just going to stop sharing and go back. Yeah, Richard, back to you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Peter. Yeah, well, you've done an amazing job to be able to share all that live with us in the middle of this storm that's prevented other people from even appearing on screen, never mind doing a live internet demo. But
the trees have almost been double outside. I'm looking at them now.
Well, I hope it doesn't get much worse and that you stay safe and sound up there.
Yeah.
that has brought us back to time, which is great. There are, yeah, thanks very much for that. There are lots of positive comments in the chat, and there are also a few questions in the Q&A, Peter. So I don't know whether you might be able to have a look at those, you know, while we carry on with the next talk. I'm sure you'd be interested to see the chat ones anyway, because there's a lot of positive stuff there. So that would be great. But I'm going to try and keep us to time after the various difficulties that we've experienced, because I know people will have other things to do this afternoon and lunch to have and things like that. So our final talk for the morning will hopefully not be affected by storms and power cuts and dodgy internet connection and everything, because it's pre-recorded. Sadly, James Lowen, many of you will know James, not least from his book, Much Ado About Mothing. So we asked him to speak at today's meeting. He was delighted to do so, but unfortunately couldn't make today's date. So instead, he's very kindly pre-recorded the talk for us. And Zoe, I will hand over to you, Zoe, and Zoe will play the video.
Lovely. Thank you, Richard. Oh, where is it? Oh, screen. Wait. Right, I'm trying to find it. Hang on. Ah, right. That's what we want. That. Sorry, bear with me. All right.
It'll be worth the wait, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, share screen. Right. Share. Hang on. Sorry. Right. Let's try again. Share screen. That one. Share sound. Share.
Yeah, it's looking promising.
And then there's also another button I need to press here, which I can't get to. Oh, this little zoom thing's in the way. Why is it in the way? Oh, there we are. Right, and then I want full screen, which is that one. Okay, and let me know, Richard, if it works.
So, hello everyone. Although fieldwork actually prevents me from joining you live, as it were, I'm nevertheless absolutely delighted to talk to you today about the joy of moths, and all the more so because at this same event 3 years ago, I launched a project to tell stories of Britain's rare and remarkable moths, and so many people around the auditorium helped. It was absolutely fantastic, and that eventually became this book, which is called Much Ado About Mothing. So who am I? I'm primarily a writer. I write about the intersection between nature, conservation and travel. And I've written about 13 books, 3 of them of which have won prizes, 2 winning Travel Guidebook of the Year awards. And last year I had 2 books out, both about moths, the one on the right being a field guide, a gateway to moths for those just getting into our wonderful pastime. And the one that forms the backdrop to the talk today is more of a travel narrative. It's along the lines of Patrick Barkham's book, The Butterfly Isles, if you like that, but for moths. So how did this book come about? Well, I remember the date absolutely precisely. It was the 7th of July, 2012. And that was the day that my life changed forever. It wasn't the day I got married, and nor was it the day that our daughter was born. But it did involve a female, but it just wasn't a girl or a woman. She was arrestingly beautiful. She brought a wholly unexpected buckling of the knees, an unanticipated thumping of the heart, and she was a moth. To be precise, my new love was a poplar hawk moth, shown to me by a friend, James Hunter, who's a moth trapper down in Dartford in Kent, and I was living in London at the time. This moth, she was sweetly furry, she was wrapped in silver, banded with bronze and grizzled with iron filings. And she was huge, and she was glorious, and she was utterly wrong. Because moths, and I knew this for an absolute fact, were small, brown and dun. Uninteresting and usually irritating. They were eerie creatures of the night that remained invisible, but somehow still destroyed my suits. So for nearly 40 years, and I make no bones about it, I was among the many people who routinely slander all moths as being clothes-munching, plant-destroying pests. But this popular hawk moth, it opened my eyes, it brought me to my senses, it revolutionized the way that I engage with nature. And several years later, moths hijacked my life. So Much Ado About Nothing is essentially a year-long quest to celebrate Britain's rare and remarkable moths. It's a book about moths, but it's also a book about people and place. And the book seeks to challenge people's preconceptions, to correct misunderstandings, to reboot the collective attitude to these much maligned creatures. So although unseen by most people, we mothers know that moths live everywhere. So from Cornwall, as in here, right up to the Cairngorms, I explored British landscapes with the sole purpose of coaxing moths from out of the cover of darkness and into daylight. And I sought to unveil these underdogs of the animal kingdom as attractive, astonishing, and approachable creatures. And of course, they made wonderful subjects. Britain's 2,500 varieties of moths reveal remarkable, unexpected coloration, patterning, shape. And they also divulge enchanting tales from the migratory feats of silver wise and many other migratory species, to the mastery of camouflage of a mauvais du jour, from outlandish mimicry, those clear wings, to missives revealing the true state of the planet, increases, declines, arrivals, and extinctions. And you'll see a bit of Butterfly Conservation's wonderful work permeating this talk, just as it permeated the book. But there's also more besides, moths' service to us via pollinating wild plants and agricultural crops. Some 45% of moths may be carrying pollen around our countrysides. What would our countrysides be without moths? And so accordingly, hiking up mountains and wading through marshes and bivvying out on heathlands and roaming by night amid ancient woodlands, and occasionally risking limb and perhaps even life, but constantly on the move through this year, travelling 14,000 miles, exploring 139 locations across 27 counties over 258 days and nights. I follow the trails of both Victorian collectors and also present-day conservationists. And I was seeking to understand why environmentalists and many ordinary folk alike purport to love what a YouGov poll suggests that roughly 2/3 of the general public claim that they hate moths. And these investigations, they reveal a really heady world of criminality and controversy and conservation. But as counterweight to these intoxicating travels the length and breadth of Britain, my young daughter Maya and I track the seasons through a kaleidoscope of hundreds of moth species living covertly in our suburban garden in Norfolk. And without leaving home, we bonded through this shared joy that we found in the uncommon beauty of common creatures. For perhaps the greatest virtue of moths, we learned throughout this year, is their accessibility. Moths may be everywhere, but above all, they are here, living alongside us. And quite unexpectedly, no animals may be better placed to inspire the environmentalists of the future, such as these students at the University of East Anglia. And what better way to spend and to dedicate an entire year of my life, kicked off here at this event 3 years ago. So I'm going to start with some of the greatest hits of garden mothing, because that's where we all start mothing, before offering some tasters of the travel dimension of the big moth year. And given that my daughter and I recorded 14,000 individual moths of 466 species across 151 nights at home, there's plenty to choose from. And each morning, my daughter and I performed the much-loved ceremony of moth trapping. And we should never forget this, the turning off the electricity at dawn, the nervous steps down to the trap, pots and notebook in hand, the careful removal of the bulb and housing, and then heart-pounding, the reverential examination of both sides of every egg tray, before cataloguing, as my daughter has done here, every single moth. And every time, we must never forget, every time is like Christmas morning. So spring moth life furnished a really rich vein of existence for my daughter and I to appreciate. Each morning before breakfast, bubble wrapped with birdsong, we'd enthusiastically riffle through the egg trays to see what we could find. And the species we discovered provide stories of ecology and evolution, of camouflage and conservation that ferry us through many a school run. We admired the mad grey Professor Hare of the Muslim moth top right, left, and the sprawling nature of the pale tussock. And we gawped at Spectacle, you know, that unexpectedly natty goth moth with this upstanding Mohican and John Lennon specs on what passes for its forehead. Mind you, that did prompt my daughter to say, that moth can't be real, Dada. Those eyes are in the wrong place. And clearly, I had a bit of kind of tuition to do on the moth front with my daughter. And then other species tells different stories. So during my lifetime, the pumpkin seed-shaped orange footman has become 100-fold commoner. Astonishing. A beneficiary of air quality improvements that have enabled its lichen foodstuff to flourish. And on the right, you see the map from produced by BC showing the incredible spread of this species. And then there's the peppered moth, a world famous insect, evidence of natural selection in our garden. And that peppered moth piqued my daughter's interest in camouflage insects, you know, those that go to remarkable lengths to elude detection by moth munchers. And we find moths that look like leaves, such as the wonderful Art Deco creation that is Nangle Shades. And then there are those that are dead ringers for sticks. I mean, think back to the first time that you saw a pale prominent and a buff tip. And think back to your disbelief, your incredulation at their appearance. What remarkable creatures these are. But most giggle-worthy of all, of course, particularly if you're a 9-year-old girl, or indeed her dad, are the bird poo moths, you know, splashes of black and white excrement, moths hiding in plain sight. But we also catch insects that split family opinion as to whether they are butterfly or moth, such as the brimstone in the previous slide and the early thorn here. Or indeed the Sultan of Spring, the emperor moth, the glamorous, imperious dayflyer that effortlessly puts to shame pretty much every British butterfly. Controversial in these surroundings, I know, but my personal view. And catching this trio prompts discussion as to what differentiates butterflies from moths. And the rightful answer, as we all know, but one that distresses moth haters everywhere, is not much. Taxonomically, for a start, the 6 butterfly families are all nestling within the 120-ish families of moths. And linguistically, English turns out to be an outlier and differentiated between moths and butterflies. In French, in German and Dutch, we have butterflies, papillons in French, and we have night butterflies, papillons de nuit, and it's the same principle in German and in Dutch. So one might argue that moths are simply butterflies with bad PR. Or, put another way, butterflies are simply moths with good PR. Either way, this book was about trying to change some of that. Now, more than any other landscape, I feel that mothing in forest absolutely demands nocturnal exploration. Only during the inkiest hours do woodlands reveal their innermost secrets, creatures that shun daylight every bit as much as a vampire. And among trees, the other world of night is when the wildest things appear. Trunks become shadows, become monsters. And yet it's in this sylvan realm that somehow I managed to learn to feel the most alive. So in Dorset in late May, we joined Butterfly Conservation's Fiona Haynes to help out with a project funded under the Back from the Brink portfolio. And normally this nationally threatened species, one of England's 8 protected species, remember, is surveyed by counting caterpillars. But by catching an astonishing 17 Barbary carpets, we confirmed to Fiona that surveying for adults, under license of course, is a viable technique. We also survey moths in the world famous ecological laboratory of Oxford's Wytham Woods with the late, great and still forevermore sorely missed Doug Boys. It was a really special night and all the more special now. We'll miss you, Doug. We also spend several nights in the Great Alston Forest of Kent, which came to national prominence in the 1930s for its array of rare breeders found nowhere else in Britain. Some of these have vanished already, sadly, Lesser Bell, Lunar Double Stripe, but many remain. And on one particularly memorable Alston night, the forest was absolutely alive, and it's the most intense night of mothing I've ever experienced, and we're assaulted by chaos. By dawn, we've tracked 3,000 moths, and the same number again have blizzarded around us without entering the trap, we reckon. By dawn, we've identified just shy of 200 species, and their number includes species such as the Great Oak Beauty, a quasi-mythical deep forest species for which, surprisingly, we provide the first conclusive Alston records. There's also plenty of scarce Mauvais du Jour, a rare and vibrant mint green wonder of the night, whose black shadows melded effortlessly with the verdant foliose lichen that wraps around oak branches. There's also this species here, Agratarian Morales. 20 years ago, roughly, there'd been no sign of this micromoth for about 5 years, and there were thoughts that it might have gone extinct. But since then, the fortunes of this hornbeam specialist have absolutely rocketed. It wasn't in Alston Forest until 7 years ago, something like that, but we caught 30 on a single night, and that's a number that takes our breath away. We'd have been over the moon just to have caught a single one. We also catch this species, Acrobasis Two Madonna. It's a scarce but relatively regular migrant moth. According to Sean Clancy and the Atropos website, the average count for a decade in the UK is around 65. But in this one night at Alston, we caught 90, unprecedented numbers that may well hint at local breeding. And there's something of the similar ilk with other surprises too. We find dark crimson underwings at a new site that's suitable for breeding. And this is a species that in 2019, when we did our big year, was recolonizing southeast England from the Low Countries. And at a secret woodland elsewhere in Kent, we hook up with Ian Roberts, Folkestone Mother, to survey a population of dusky hooktip, a species that only started breeding in Britain during 2017. And as Nemoralis, as Two Madonna, as dark crimson underwing, and then as this dusky hooktip will suggest, things change really fast in the world of moths. Since 1900, Mark Parsons calculates the UK has gained roughly 140 colonists, most since 1990. Their arrival expedited by factors such as the horticultural trade and climate change. But there's an unsavoury side to the UK's moth balance sheet as well, and that's brought out superbly in last year's groundbreaking publication from BC. Perhaps 50 species have probably gone nationally extinct, and we know from BC that roughly 1 in 8 resident macromoths, more than 100 species, is categorised as either nationally threatened or near threatened. And where BC could determine long-term trends, 4 times as many species are declining as are increasing. And as I remember Richard Fox announcing at this event last year, in total, Britain, quite shockingly, has 1/3 fewer moths flying today than 50 years ago. Now, a few years ago, composer Harrison Birtwistle was worried enough by the situation to write a piece of music called the Moth Requiem, where voices forlornly encant the Latin names of moths past. And things really have only got much worse since. Okay, 6 years ago, I was told off by my wingman for the year, Will Saw, for being sizist, because I kept on passing him these egg trays that were dusted with tiny, irrelevant specks of life called micromoths. And micros at the time weren't my thing. They were too small to see, they were too difficult to tell apart, they seemed to have exclusively Latin names that on the book page were longer than the actual moths, and life was too short for micros. But, Will told me, moths are moths are moths. And over time, my frostiness thawed. I realised that fun-sized moths could be lookers. Desiderocrania subperp, for example, purpurella, for example, wears these enormous black shades, boasts this massive, straggly grey-black hair, and is clad in a heliotrope-dotted glam rock golden cloak. It's a 1970s rock star, absolutely. And then you've got the disco dancing Agratarian Morales, the green longhorns, and clouds of males lecking together to attract females. And then the moth madness of water veneers, the mayflies of the moth world. And micromoths, of course, offer amazing stories. You know, spindle moths, Ipponomuta, they can't hear ultrasound themselves, but they still manage to use it to jam the radars of bats. And Will, my mate, was right. These micros really, really had something. So as my year clunked into gear, I made 2 resolutions. The first to treat all moths as equals, and the second to handpick a subset of glorious must-see micros to track down. And the first target was called Jeff. You all know Jeff's proper name is Alavonia jefferella, but we all revere him or her as Jeff. And Jeff is a supermodel on the micromoth catwalk. It's relatively common and widespread across England and Wales, so it feels attainable as a glitter ball. And Jeff is a spring creature, typically powered by the first rays of sun each day. And my first 7 attempts to find Jeff were unsuccessful, but finally, an hour after dawn, in a Dorset woodland, in a shard of light romantically perforating the canopy, I glimpsed floating gold dust. This was Jeff. And there were a dozen males dancing together, lecking above the shady, tangly brambles. With my eye now in, I seemingly encountered Jeff everywhere, even without searching, and at all times of the day, and even once at night. And Jeff, I realised, Jeff is the micromoth that I've been waiting for. Now, as spring morphed into summer, we tracked down other mini-moth targets. So in the Wye Valley, a rare relative of Jeff, Ocophora bractella, flits into our traps just before dawn, and what a splendid creature it is too. In Kent, we target the neon-striped fireball that's Persigna procerella, first recorded in Britain during the infamous drought year of 1976, but we see several at different Kent localities. A really absolutely cracking species. And then there's Cyanida dentalis, one of those moths that simply cannot possibly be real. It's not a paroxysm of colour like the previous three micros I've just spoken about, but instead that the dentalis riot encompasses pattern. It's got this complicated interplay of cream, tan and chocolate spikes that creates a magic eye optical illusion that denies the very presence of invertebrate. This is not a moth, it says, but a grass seed, or a miniature wheat sheaf, or a tiny hedgehog. And eventually I catch roughly 100 somewhere between Kent and Dorset. And by rights, I mean, that should be that. 4 exquisite micromoths successfully tracked down, admired, eulogized, written about, released. But my plans made no account for the year's most dazzling find, the rediscovery in Britain of Hypercalia citrinalis. Thought extinct in Britain, if not Ireland, since the 1970s, it was gone, absolutely gone. But in 2019, it was found alive and well on the Kent Chalk Escarpment. It was a glorious micromoth hiding in plain sight. And one wonderful July evening, thanks to James Hunter, the man who got me into moths, we caught up with its garish yellow and red sweetness, which hollered about how little we know about British wildlife. I mean, citrinalis was a wonder. It was gorgeous and it was tiny. If one moth was going to change the way I perceive micromoths forevermore, it was this one. Okay, time to talk about some wet moths. Unlike chalk downlands in Kent, freshwater wetlands reveal pretty much nothing of their moths by day. So I spent various nights and early mornings in the Norfolk Broads, getting to grips with its specialities. And we catch dotted footman and small dotted footman, being one of only 4 resident larger moths that the amazingly talented Victorian entomologists somehow failed to discover. We also catch plenty of reed leopards, those peculiarly rounded wings retreating backwards interminably, and yet still this preposterously long abdomen protrudes beyond them like a thumb tip beyond plaster. And well to the west of the Norfolk Broads, they're the remnants, a solitary 1% of the original expanse of what once were truly wild waters, the fens. And following 2 centuries of drainage, Britain's answer to the Danube Delta was destroyed, reinvented, thank you, as England's breadbasket. Now, draining the fens, as BC has made clear, was the single most dramatic cause of British moth extinctions. Arash, many-lined, reed tussock, gypsy moth, marsh dagger were among the species that joined Britain's disappeared. And to honour their passing, I pledged to track down some Fenland survivors, such as Concolorus and Silver Bard. But the most exciting quarry in Fenland terms is a capricious rarity, the marsh moth, a great prize even for Victorian collectors. Now, drainage extinguished marsh moth from Fenland during the 1960s. Now it clings on only at 2 coastal reserves in Lincolnshire. It's considered nationally endangered. And every year, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust runs 1 or more spring surveys of adults, and we join them on a worryingly squally May night. And whenever you intend to spend a long time searching for moths, failure always whispers its imminence. It only takes one thing. It could be inept trapping sites, it could be poor weather conditions, it could be early flight season, it could be late flight season, it could be some other form of technological ineptitude for everything to go wrong. And I have to say, on this particular gloomy, squally night, we weren't particularly optimistic. But boy, did we succeed. Not only did we catch 10 males, and admittedly they are understated creatures, they're never destined to be a pin-up, they're definitely a mother's moth, but spotting 3 males circling a ribwort plantain stem led us to discover a female. Now this, in marsh moth terms, was big news. It was only the second confirmed record of its gender in Britain, the only other one being in 1948. And we take the first photographs of a live female in Britain. It was something that was worth writing up in a couple of magazine articles, including in Acrobasis and BBC Wildlife. Now that unforeseen female marsh moth aside, for many of the year's ventures, the anticipation is all about known unknowns. We know our target moth lives here, so it won't be a revelation to see it. Instead, the tenterhooks emanate from the unknowns of whether it has emerged and whether it will reach our traps or nets in whatever conditions greet us on the precise evening that we visit. Nevertheless, we travel with a sense of, if not exactly entitlement, then certainly expectation. But there is none of that with a species called marsh carpet. This is a moth of unknown unknowns. It disappeared entirely in the 1940s, was feared extinct. Even now, it remains fickle to the point of wholesale unpredictability, thriving at a site briefly before disappearing irrevocably, inexplicably. Now, Norfolk presumably remains a stronghold, but the first decade of this century listed just 5 records. So when I asked experienced local mothers where we should try and see it, everyone shrugged. Nobody knew. So living in Norfolk, I tried something different, and I compiled recent records of marsh carpet from garden moth traps around Norwich, and triangulating the catches, I pinpoint a quite promising stretch of damp river meadows, which just happens to be a mile from home. How convenient. And the trail there leads to a disused fish farm that's managed by the Environment Agency. And through a friend, I learned that the moth's food plant, common meadow rue, grows here, and I start to get really quite excited. So we hook up with officials from Environment Agency and Natural England, and after much toing and froing and after much on and offing, unbelievably, we catch 3 adult marsh carpet, 1 in a trap and 2 on the windows of an outbuilding. And this moth is glorious. It's a gently curved piece of fudge through which run these thick veins of licorice, each dusted with sugar. Now, as far as I'm aware, nobody's caught more than 3 marsh carpets in a night before, which suggests good things about this site. And indeed, as far as I'm aware, these were the only adult marsh carpets caught anywhere in Britain during 2019. So against all conceivable odds, it turns out we've found a wholly new site for one of the Britain's rarest and most poorly understood moths. And it just goes to show that even amateur, novice mothers can sometimes do good. Okay, it's just gone 6 o'clock on an early August morning, and I'm packing up after another night's mothing on the RSPB reserve at Dungeness. And the message and accompanying photograph are from a local motho, Leishon, some of you may know him, who asks rhetorically if I want to see the moth he's caught in his nearby garden. Now, I've never seen one before, but I know precisely what it is. It's a tamarisk peacock. It's very rare. It's not from around here. It's a winged wanderer from foreign lands. It's about the 20th to have been caught in Britain. And moth migration, as Steve Nash tells us routinely on Twitter, is simultaneously a wonder and a mystery of the natural world. That such fragile creatures can fly such distances, over open ocean indeed, absolutely astounds me. And for many mothers, it follows that catching migrants provides the most thrilling dimension to their hobby. And migrant mothing really is the art of the possible. If opening your garden moth trap makes you feel like being a child on Christmas Day, running traps at a site famed for migrants in decent conditions is like all those Christmases coming at once. But will Santa bring you a present? Well, there's only way to find out. And so I spent many nights during 2019 trapping suitable migrant locations from Norfolk right the way through to Cornwall. And we see plenty of migrant moths on the Acrobasis BC Moth Night, etc. Some are common migrants such as silverwire and diamondback. Others are true rarities such as those shown on this slide seen in Kent and in Dorset. But one migrant, the wondrous convolvulus hawk moth, drives me absolutely round the bend as I keep encountering it, not in my own trap, but in other people's traps. And you know what I'm talking about. You want to catch your own moth, don't you? It's all very well seeing other people's moths, seeing moths in pots, but that's not really what it's about. You want to catch your own moth. You want to contribute yourself. So wherever I try, I fail. I just keep on seeing other people's traps. I take to Twitter and try and seek some advice on where to catch one myself. And people say, hang out your laundry. You know, that's the best thing to do. So I do, but nothing comes to my my Calvin Kleins. I'm sure that's what they are. But eventually I succeed in a quarry on the east side of Portland Bill in Dorset after a massive storm that's hailed from Africa, which gullied paths into flash-flood rivers. And I punched the air. And catching this beast is every bit as scintillating as I hoped. And I lose myself in the black water pools of its eyes, take in every stripe, line and blemish, and follow the jagged leaps and fallings of a stock market of markings from the inner wing through to the outer edge. And I am complete. And as we dismantle the traps and lug them up the slope to the car, I become bone weary, exhausted by the elation of finally trapping this particular target. I need sleep like never before. But I don't get it. As I'm stacking the car with the paraphernalia of moth trapping back at the road, I get back to mobile phone reception. And I have an email from Chris Fox, a Dorset moth that we'd met a couple of nights earlier. And the matter-of-fact title alone made my knees buckle. Oleander hawk moth, it said. And then when I read the email itself, I stopped breathing. Oleander hawk moth is peerless. It's a master migrant, having probably travelled well over 1,500 miles to reach Chris's farm in North Dorset. Its core range is tropical Africa and Asia. And it's huge. It rivals my mobile phone for size. And it's a rarity indeed. You know, there's 120 odd records by 2019, but most of those come from the first half of the 20th century. So inevitably, we give up on sleep and drive home via North Dorset. But incongruously, when we arrive, the moth is being confined and shaded under an ice cream tub because Chris doesn't have a pot big enough in which to safely house it. He removes the pot and I gasp. This moth is irrepressibly patterned, its lysergic swirls giddying me. My eyes career forward to the creature's head before turning towards the outer edge of the upper wing, where a dark-pupilled pseudo-eye stares angrily at me. The colours render this moth sort of otherworldly. A violet bruise pours into olive, rose twists into apple green. Those antennae are lemon, those evil would-be eyes, orange. Yes, those eyes. There's almost an insidious malevolence to this beast's beauty. It's a not so jolly green giant. It's a witch doctor in invertebrate form, but it's addictive too, and I can't wrench my eyes away. It's the story of my big moth year in one single glorious animal. Now, time decrees that I need to end the tale there. So sadly, we don't have time to talk about my early stages for the searches for the early stages of moth life, including stumbling down a Dorset cliff with Mark Parsons to count the larval cases of Eudarcia Richardson. And there's no time to doff hats to the success of the rare invertebrates in the Cairngorms project, which has revealed Kentish glory to be more widespread than previously thought. And there's no time to celebrate much more garden mothing, or indeed to talk about the hawk moth, the poster boys and girls of the moth world, or to pay homage to Vladimir Nabokov's favourites, the Vespid mimicking clearwings, or indeed no time to talk about searching for the special day-flying moths of dry areas such as the Brecks, Hertfordshire and Kent's chalk downland, nor indeed to explore Scotland's special burnet moths, which may almost look pretty much the same, but each tell unique, fascinating conservation stories. And we don't have time for a night or 10 on the beach, whether in Norfolk, Suffolk or Kent, for looking for moths that speak of the strand line, from scarce pug and sandal rustic to bright wave and Sussex emerald. I also go on the trail of Victorian Lepidopterists in rock-rich areas such as Portland, the Avon Gorge in North Wales, seeking Portland ribbon wave, silky wave and weaver's wave. And the book also has a chapter on Heatham moths, starring an attempt to rediscover speckled footman, which at the time was feared possibly extinct. There's no time even to relate a series of fortunate encounters with the rare, remarkable, massive Clifton nonpareil in a year when it became abundantly clear that it was recolonising Britain. And nor can I talk to you about efforts to survey a handful of southern specialities, including black-spotted chestnut in Kent, the final target moth of the year after 14,000 miles driven, 139 locations explored across 27 counties on 258 days. And this black-spotted chestnut bottom right, it's not a looker, is it? But it was both resonant, because it was both special in itself, because it had colonised England only in the last decade, and also because it was so personally resonant, because I saw it in the garden of the man who trapped Britain's second ever example of the black-spotted chestnut. But this was the very same man, James Hunter, who introduced me to moths through that inaugural popular hawk moth 7 years previously. And this is the thing about moths. There is never an end to the wonders they afford, no conclusion to issues with their conservation, nor bounds to our understanding of their status, distribution, or ecology. There is so much to talk about, so much to investigate, so much to help conserve. And there is, as I hope I have shown in the last half hour, truly and inarguably much ado about mothing. So thank you very much. I'll now stop sharing and I'll hand back to the front of house and hope that all is well. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Great. Well, thanks in his absence to James for that talk. It's his passion, which of course all of us share for moths and for moth recording, really shines through both when he speaks, as we've been fortunate to hear just then, but also through the book as well, which, as he said, contains many more stories of many more species than he was able to cover in the half hour just then. Right, so we're at the end of the meeting. We're on time despite all of the difficulties. Thanks so much to all of you, to the audience, those of you who've come along, given up your time, and stayed with us through all of the technical difficulties that we experienced this morning. So it's really great to have you all there virtually. Hopefully by this time next year we might all be together in a venue somewhere, able to chat and share stories and all the rest of it, as well as listening to talks. Huge thanks to our speakers who've, as you've heard, have battled some difficult situations in order to present their talks this morning, with no sound and no power and inability to open doors in Darren's case. But I think it's been a really interesting, fascinating set of talks. But I think that, whilst all of the talks have enthused us, inspired us, interested us with new research into what's happening to our moths, into new ways of recording and looking at data, and all of these sort of technological advances that have been shown by particularly by Zoe and by Peter this morning. The talk by James Lowen just kind of sets us all up, doesn't it? I'm sure you will all leave the meeting now enthused about the mothing year to come, all the species that you're hoping to see. Perhaps you've already laid some plans for field trips out to try and see some new species. I know I have, and it's part of the excitement of mothing is that kind of planning, isn't it, of what you might try and see over the coming year. We enjoy mothing, we love seeing moths, but of course it's your records coming into schemes like the National Moth Recording Scheme that drive all of the research and conservation work going on across the UK. So please keep recording. Hats off, as always, to the county recorders and their assistants for all the fantastic work, huge amount of work they put in every year, on screen, on paper, on spreadsheets, not the exciting stuff, not out looking at moths, but hard work behind the scenes, processing records and liberating them for conservation, research and education and so on. So final thanks to the two Zoes, Zoe Randall, who organises this meeting, put the programme together and all the rest of it, and other Zoe, who is hiding behind the butterfly conservation events panel there, making sure that the technology works as well as possible from our perspective. Obviously, sadly, we can't control the storms and the power, but we do our best to keep the meeting running. So I think that's it. We're past time now. So thanks again to everyone, and look forward to, well, have a brilliant year mothing, and look forward to seeing you again sort of this time next year. Bye.